Triangle of Sadness, which is a film which has 3 very distinct acts. It begins in the fashion world. It begins looking like it's going to be a version of The Square, his previous Palme d'Or winner. He won the Palme d'Or for this film as well. He's double star filmmaker, and it begins in this kind of
novel, not so wonderful.
Microphone. It begins in it begins in the fashion world, and then it departs into a luxury cruise that one of the main characters is being has been given for free in order to promote, as an influencer, in order to promote a cruise experience. There are various millionaires and billionaires and an unruly socialist captain,
Marxist
captain on board, played by Woody Harrelson, on board this cruise, and then this sort of absurd satirical anti-establishment farce plays out with all the vomit and shit you could imagine, and ends with a bang. And then the third act, quite a long third act, arrives. This is a 2.5-hour film, like The Square, like where Osland is, really, I think. And it ends with Lost, basically, and a kind of Parasite-style power swap polemic.
I mean, you could have, the third act could have been junked, and he could have just flashed up, said, and now just watch Peter Brook's Lord of the Flies, R.I.P.
I think it's weird. It's interesting to. I would like to know. It would be interesting to see how this goes down with critics, like whether or not the third act felt necessary or not. I think it feels to me like there's a very clear edit point.
PB was already taken with it.
Oh, really? Yeah, that's surprising.
Of course.
I mean, as you said after the screening, they love to have their bellies tickled. These jury critics.
Well, look, it's the anti-capitalism of fools on the ship of fools. I mean, that's basically what this.
Explain what you mean by anti-capitalism of fools.
So,
with relation to Act 3.
Well, I'd say with relation to the entirety, what it provides is the sense of an other and of an outside to capital, to the reign of the dominion of exchange relations, which is actually not an affront in the slightest to the continuation of these. Mm-hmm. And at the level, I don't want to get too ideology critique, but it's very hard to perceive a film like this in terms outside of that, because formally it's not especially exciting.
It's prestige TV, basically. Apart from a few interesting camera
at the level
swings.
of ideology, it's essentially just affirming a given, dogs a given belief, which is that people have got to positions of power through skills, right? And at the end, when the cook
and ruthlessness.
Through ruthlessness and through independence of mind and through a kind of Robinson Crusoe style self-sufficiency. Mm-hmm. And the fact that the great role reversal that is portended throughout the first 2 acts and is finally delivered in the third happens precisely via this means, because the cook suddenly becomes the
toilet cleaner. So actually the end of the fecal chain. So not
true.
The eating,
Yeah,
exactly.
The very bottom of the pyramid is suddenly inverted, and it's the fact that this film seems to understand revolution in these terms. It shows its kind of consummately liberal origins, because essentially all it can see. It can't imagine collective resistance, or it has basically a very pessimistic understanding of human nature, because there can be no mutual aid, there can be no collaboration, and there can be no recognition of mutual class interest. Instead, what you have is one person amasses a great deal of power through their own self-sufficiency. And I said to Owen afterwards that it reminded me of Zuckerberg spending a year consuming only the animals that he killed, and so it's like the global elite are also very into this idea.
They're interested in washing their own culpability, and I think that is literalized very well in the film, where there's a Russian billionaire on the boat, or millionaire woman, who is insistent, adamant, to the detriment of everyone, because this kind of precipitates the ship sinking, that the waitress who's serving her should get into the pool and they should swap places. To her, it's a fun game, but it becomes this fun game that is supposed to be about role reversal. And this is the first role reversal that happens, and soon we'll see another role reversal. In this Lost style section.
Yeah.
What happens? Sorry, is there a phone ringing in the old background? No. This role reversal then becomes this kind of domineering role reversal. It offers it as a gift initially, but then she demands that the entire staff of the ship go into the ocean.
Ultimately, the pain,
throws them overboard, basically.
The pain of privilege, the pain of her privilege as a billionaire, forces her to demand some kind of role reversal. It's like her idea of justice.
But that's also a very ancient theme, complementing our own neo-medieval moment, to have this Bakhtin style carnivalesque, the low becomes high and the high becomes low, but for a brief interval.
Only ever temporary.
Before. And ultimately the film suggests that this this hierarchy, this moment of inversion will be restored because, I mean, we can do spoilers. Or
what?
We can do spoilers?
Yeah, we can do spoilers. People are going to know about this film.
Because despite this moment in which the toilet attendant has finally recovered dignity and all the rest of it, once they discover they're in fact on a luxury resort, then...
Yeah, sorry, the other side of the island literally has a luxury resort, which was under their noses the whole time. But I think you're right, because there is this very Rabelaisian sense to the inversions, the shit that flows from the toilets, the vomit that is pouring out of people, and this
Rabelaisian, sorry.
As in Rabelais' world, like Bakhtin's book about, Gargantua and Petrogrel.
Not familiar.
Yeah. So the carnival as a book, basically.
Right.
And you've got shit flooding down the stairs. You've got vomit pouring out of people's mouths.
You've got the Billingsgate in which they're just spewing forth over the tannoy system.
They're spewing ideology as well over because the captain and he basically strikes up a friendship with the shit baron of Eastern Europe, basically.
Yeah. But there again, I would have liked if they'd got an actual communist consultant in, because it was like, he was just doing these kind of Chomsky-eye platitudes over the...
But is that not quite realistic, though?
It was very good,
quite a lot of people's socialism amounts to that.
Yeah, to quote, he browses on his phone.
Yeah. Because the American idea of socialism is again still rooted in...
But no, the important point there
deeply capitalist
is
country.
The real act of the real solidarity that happens really is between the captain and the billionaire. They're the ones who have a true bonding in this film. Actually, they have they strike up this quite unusual friendship. They lock themselves into the captain's cabin and deliver these quotes over the tannoy, and it's this moment
they're
of
chaotic,
shared
aren't
bonding.
They feel a sense that something must shift.
But it's also it's the top of the pyramid, isn't it? The general and the king at the top of their pile of gold. Everyone else is in flux, but they are the ones who kind of even though they
it is actually raining, so I'm just going to move podcast equipment slightly.
I mean, we should say how utterly delighted and giddy, in fact, the audience we were part of was to be watching this great anti-capitalist farce.
This Palme d'Or winner.
To the point, in fact, where at a moment of, when the toilet attendant scores such a great victory, people began clapping her.
I found this despicable.
Yeah, and at this moment, this was my Brechtian distancing effect. I suddenly zoomed out and I thought, hang on, what's going on here?
So to recap for listeners, there is a moment, and this is a bit of a spoiler, where the toilet attendant says, "On ship, I am toilet attendant. On this island, I am captain."
Yeah, it was a Yas Queen clapback.
And they say, "What am I?" And then then someone says, "You're captain." And then she throws a bit of octopus, a bit of roasted octopus.
Which she has caught.
She sees the means of production, allegedly, and she makes this point of saying, I should get more food because I have organised I've facilitated the organisation. So it's not to each according to their need. It's who goes.
And here's the trick. This is why this film's kind of deep ideological structure gets revealed, because actually the means of production here are means of subsistence. They're pre-capitalist, they're pre-industrial. And that's why it can only pursue this theme outside of the actual boat itself. I thought a more interesting film would have been the crew take over the ship itself, redirect its ends and its purpose, and have to collectively determine where it goes. But of course, that film wouldn't win the Palme d'Or.
No. I mean, well, actually, talking about bearing its structure kind of very visible, the actual island that they end up on. I mean, there's a question about why they. No rescue ship has been out to find them. You think a sinking cruise liner would be found very quickly. But anyway, so they're on this island, and it's unusual that there is this, Leviathan-esque war of all against all on one side of the island. There's base subsistence farming. On the other side of the world, the other hemisphere of the island, as it were, there is luxury. There's a golden lift that will take them up to this resort. So you've literally got a microcosm of the entire, third and first worlds, basically on this tiny, tiny island somewhere off the coast of Africa, Mediterranean, or whatever. And it has some clever inversions, and it has some self-awareness and some irony. But what the thing that remained, I guess, unclear for me is a good third of the film is committed to this satire of the fashion industry. Why make so much bones about them being models? Because he really commits to the kind of, you think this is going to be a narrative
and
about...
there is this critique of influencer culture, right?
Superficial
this idea, I'm not going to eat the pasta, I just need a photo with the pasta.
But that's very lazy. Like, why make him a model?
But they're just alternate models of capital accumulation. I mean, like, they have... These guys have the raw natural capital of being supremely genetically endowed. The Eastern European guy, the Russian one, has a very crude land grab style of primitive accumulation, just managed to amass oligarchic power. Then the British ones, on there, this hilarious couple, Winston and Clementine, who are arms dealers, and have, but she has the kind of manner of a WI dinner lady.
Bake sale grenades.
They exactly. They're involved in the military-industrial, complex, and so he's sort of just schematically like a punch cartoon, laying out these different spheres or sectors.
I mean, it's hard because we're seeing a lot of Kino here, but this is an extended episode of Succession. It is essentially like prestige TV with a slightly different shape. With a more conclusive, less sort of
but that very famous conical Russian Revolution era diagram about the backs of the workers support the factory owners and so on and so on. So you've got the Tsar at the top and Tsarina at the top. There is your pyramid. There is your triangle. This film is very, very literal and very clear about making itself aware that this film is actually a diagram. This film is like a three-dimensional structure that it's showing you, rather than this kind of linear thing.
I did think about Pinter quite a lot, actually, but also about like. I think at a certain point, seeing a film like this, knowing that it's been successful, that it will be very successful, I guess what made me angry, and this is quite, lived experience crew, but we've watched what happened to Bernie Sanders. We've watched what happened to Jeremy Corbyn. It may be that many, many liberal audiences delight in this film.
Exactly.
It may be that Osland and directors like him were supportive of progressive socialist movements in the West, but ultimately the hordes of people can see these films and feel that a point has been made. But we did have a very clear chance for a politician who embodied the values demonstrated by this film to take power and take control, and they did not, precisely because of the kinds of people who watch these films. And in that sense, I would rather watch a film that ends at the end of Act 2 with a sense of chaos and miserabilism than a film that attempts to feel like it's telling people.
Because it cheapens the alternative.
I mean, because it goes through a belly laugh. It's basically AOC wearing Eat the Rich at the Met Gala.
Right.
This is what it feels like.
And this is the sense of profound indignation I had after Parasite, actually, which was a screening in which exactly the same set of responses are on display. This kind of these kind of giddiness, actually.
How exciting!
Of the permission to feel that Eat the Rich is somehow the consummation, the most we could hope for. When it's actually that's the least. The most shallow forms, the most asinine and adolescent of things is to hope that you can watch the rich people on board.
I mean, the only logic it embellishes or amplifies is the logic of revenge.
Exactly. Of envy, politics of envy, and so this is why I mean it's the anti-capitalism of force, because the characterization of Occupy, of Corbyn, of Sanders by their sorts of audiences and the jury who would have voted this film top dog is that these politics are animated by a profound ressentiment rather than any structural understanding or logical, rational.
But that's what you get. You get to go into your theatre and you get to have a temporary inversion, like your millionaire asking the waitress to go into the pool. You get it. You get king for a day. You get to flip it, and then you get to walk away, and it kind of neutralises that desire to create a true,
It's no coincidence
transition.
These films are being made in the kind of networked internet, late capitalist moment we are in at the moment.
But and an additional indignation of Parasite of these sorts of films for me is that I do not want to have to appreciate films in a kind of Žižekian ideology critique way. I think I think that's doing a disservice to film watching, right? To cinema, and it rarely results in more interesting conclusions about any films of any quality. But a film like this really cannot be interpreted or talked about at any length outside of that mode, and that's
a problem.
That's a problem.
But that's why it's not really cinema.
Exactly.
No,
exactly.